I knew what happened to me when I put a substance in me. I had decades of experience around that. Once I put a substance in me, if it's alcohol, I get thirstier. If I put coke in me, I would just want more. My thinking has no bearing on it. I just reconstruct my thinking to make sure I get the next one. Sitting at a pub bar on a lock-in, going through a heart attack, having previously been in hospital and had surgery, my best thinking around this heart attack was to order some more cocaine and deal with it tomorrow. I did read the doctor's opinion from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that night, and it was like someone had switched the floodlights on in a previously dark football stadium.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Carl. Hi listeners, welcome to this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. As ever, I'd like to ask you to rate and review the show on any platform that you can find and where you're listening to this. And as always, I'm keen on hearing from any and all 12 steppers, no matter which fellowship, to be one of my guests here on this pod. So if this is you or someone you know, just send me an email on 12steps12questions@gmail.com, and the email is also in the show notes. And with that, let's get to my guest for today. So pleased that he's finally here. It took a little while for us to arrange it. Carl, please introduce yourself.
My name is Carl. I'm a recovered alcoholic and drug addict, recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body, but not cured. I arrived or was brought into a room of Cocaine Anonymous a little over 8 years ago, and through the grace of God and what has happened to me since that day, I've managed to stay clean and sober for a little over 8 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carl. Let's get to the first question. The first question that I ask each guest on this show. So the first of the 12 questions is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yes, I did. Quite honestly, though, I never thought they shaped me at the time. I never really paid them much attention, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. I've only been able to have hindsight since I got clean and sober, strangely enough. I was obviously being driven by something more powerful right up until that point.
Yeah.
I look back on it now, and yeah, there were two significant things in my life. One was seeing someone burnt to death in front of my eyes at a very early age, and actually being more concerned about how other people thought I should react rather than actually reacting to it myself. And then my parents, they should never have got together. I'm grateful they did and they had me, but it was a toxic household. And looking back on it, I became fiercely self-reliant as a response to what I now know to be complex post-traumatic stress disorder in childhood, rejection, basically. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it was, high or low on the Richter scale. I have no idea where my actual trauma rates on that scale. But it was, in hindsight, I can see that it did affect me, and that's all I need to know, that it did have an effect, not whether or not, it was the worst thing that had ever happened to anyone in the world or, the least worst thing. The scale doesn't matter. The fact was that it did have an effect on me. And recovery and being clean and sober now gives me the opportunity to deal with that. Should I choose to, and I'm slowly working my way through it.
Yeah, you said something really profound there, which is that you don't know where that is on the Richter scale, which of course is a scale that measures earthquakes first and foremost. And I wouldn't. It's everything's in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. And, what might affect one person one way might affect another person another way. And so I'm not sure if there's an objective measure, trauma measure, but you did mention something really terrifying happening in your childhood, seeing what I assume to be an accident or something like that. Perhaps without going into gory details, you did say something about the way you reacted and the way you felt you should have reacted, and that was your main concern. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've only been reflecting on recently while I've been, taking steps towards getting some therapy. And I hadn't really even thought about this incident in my life until, for decades, and I just found it puzzling to me that when I reflect back on it, I've seen something that's supposed to be, one of the most traumatic things you can see. You're powerless at the age of, 9 years old to stop someone being burnt alive in front of you. And yet I felt a sense of guilt immediately afterwards that I wasn't able to do something about it, that I was going to be judged for not being able to do something about it. I mean, no one could have done anything about it. I wasn't overly traumatized by what I saw, but it was the sense of powerlessness that I took away from it more than anything else. The fact that I was frozen and unable to do anything. The fact that I couldn't, and no one gave me any support around that. It also, I'd like to say, there was no, it was like literally once I'd reported what I'd seen to the police, it was never spoken about in my household again. It was, no one ever came around to see whether that had affected me badly or not.
Which ties in with the second thing that you said about the second adverse childhood event, an ongoing one, which is that your parents didn't get along, and that you felt, I don't like putting words in your mouth, but it sounded as if you wanted to say alienated perhaps, or neglected.
I don't think they only did what they could do. And they were, don't get me wrong, this is not, I'm not criticizing my parents for the way they behaved.
Of course not.
At all. In fact, I had, I always had a secure home. I always, I was they sacrificed a lot to bring me up. I have a great relationship with both of them now. It was just that they were unable to set aside their own differences for the benefit of their child. They were driven by their, and there were never ever open discussions in the house. And funnily enough, I was probably as awkward a child as you could come across. I didn't like being hurt. I felt, I've always been particularly susceptible to being, feelings of rejection. And when it happened at a young age, I thought, well, the only way I can survive this, and it served me well up to a point, was to build some walls around myself. That was how I coped. I didn't, if I was fiercely independent and reliant only on myself, then the actions of other people could have no effect on me. And that was kind of what I was doing at a very early age, was ensuring that other people didn't have any emotional power over me. And the easiest way to do that was to just shut them out, basically.
I'm no child psychologist, of course, but it does strike me as being quite a powerful thing to happen, right? And not one, for instance, that, with all the things that were going on in my household, I've said this many times on here, it's a loud household, doors banging, there's always someone upset about something or whatever, but it was very out, if that makes sense, rather than in. And, therefore I didn't have that experience. I didn't put up any awards like that. Perhaps even I should have put up actually in hindsight, should have put up, you don't know that before you're 10 or something, you should have put up a few of them, right? And it took some time for that to happen, but to put them up so early and isolate yourself really in a way, is quite a powerful thing to happen, I think, and one that probably informed the rest of your life.
I'd say it has informed a lot of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wary of trying to put, life is a very complex thing. The stimuli that you get on a daily basis, are, too numerous to count. We do have a few things, or I have a few things that I'm aware of, and I've, like I say, this hindsight has allowed me to see certain things for what they are. And talking to people who have more experience on these sort of things help massively. And they say, and to not feel bad about reacting in a certain way to certain things, it's just the truth of it. I reacted this way. A fed B, fed C, fed D. By the time I get to S and T in the alphabet, they've got no relationship to A, but the cycle's been put in motion. And I do that over a lot of stuff in my life, and it all factors into where I find myself at any particular time. It's not just one thing, but there were, that was quite informative. And I, as it was explained to me, by a psychiatrist, don't feel that you did anything wrong. You've just done whatever you felt you needed to do at any given time. Yeah. And that's kind of where I was at 8 and 9 years old, so I did what I needed to do. Yeah. For me, like I say, the Richter scale doesn't really enter into it. It was just what I felt I needed to do. In hindsight, I can see that the choices I've made at 8 and 9 years old are probably not going to serve me very well at 17 or even at 14, let alone 18, 28, 38, whatever. But what can you expect from a child? Yeah. In hindsight, my mistakes were to keep hold of those old ideas. And that was, but then again, I can't change the fact that I didn't have any other tools. Yeah, absolutely. At that time.
So our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? So you grow up in this household that has made you put up walls. You've somewhat protected yourself, isolated yourself to a degree. And at some point in your teens, probably, you came across substances or behaviors that made you feel a certain way, and you enjoyed them, and something was introduced into your life. Talk to us about that.
Well, the first time I got drunk, I was 8.
Right. Okay. So about the time you started putting up walls.
Yeah. And I basically helped myself to alcohol that was available in the house, and by myself. I'd sit, and proceeded to get absolutely smashed. And I drank to blackout at 8. Have no memory of what went on for a great chunk of time, except the next day I wondered why I wasn't dressed in the clothes that I was dressed in the evening before. I had an interesting reaction. I felt that I should say I regretted what I did, but funnily enough, the seed was already sown that I wanted to feel that feeling that I felt when I first felt dizzy and excited and carefree, even at 8. And then I got to 11, and I was in a hurry to grow up. I wanted to feel safe and secure. I wanted to mix with older kids, I pretty quickly was getting older kids to buy bottles from the off license or cans, going to the park. I enjoyed the sensation of getting drunk. Yeah. And it wasn't enough right from the get-go just to have a drink and feel a bit tipsy. It was like, how far can I push this? What happens if I have 4, 5? There was I wanted to, right from the very start, alcohol was to get as drunk as possible. And also to learn how to drink. That was my, I was thinking, well, I need to learn how to do this. I need to know how to control this. I need to be able to carry myself well whilst drinking. And pretty quickly thereafter, I wanted to explore the other mind-altering substances, and I had a curiousness around it. It was like, I want to try all of them. So within a year, smoked weed, then it was speed, etc. By the time I was 14, I was having something every day.
Let's slow this down just for a second, if you don't mind. I mean, the idea, at 14, right, that is such a young age. That's just, for us, I know that this, for us, and, who are in 12-step groups, you and I have met in Cocaine Anonymous, we hear this all the time. Not one day goes by where I don't hear this in one way or another in someone's share, or, and to us, it's normal. We normalize so many things. But at 14, if you look at other kids that are 14 nowadays, you see them, and I'm sure I'll get, hit over the head for this by, if any 14-year-old hears that, but, they're still kind of children, aren't they, really? Or in that funny place between being an adult and being a child, and their body's still very much developing, their minds very much still developing, and their brains and all of that. And to numb yourself at 14, more or less every day, that's quite a big deal, even though to us it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, at that age, I wasn't going. I didn't have the ability. I didn't have the finances or the flexibility because of school, because of living at home, because of not, just part of to actually use to excess every day. So I don't want anyone to get that impression that I was, out of control, quote unquote. But what I was doing was I was, couldn't wait to finish school and have a joint, couldn't wait to finish school, have a can of beer. If anyone had any at lunchtime, I would always say yes. It was, and I liked the sensation. I really did. It took all my cares away. What is, you're trying to find your way in the world. You're becoming aware of, the social structure, how things work. You don't really know. And it was, it was a good friend to have, I felt at the time. I enjoyed it. I met, I had right through my teens, early 20s, right up until my early 30s, I was having a party, and it felt like a party. I could easily just go, this is, damn the consequences, I'll deal with those later. It was, I didn't see that it was a problem at all. I met some great people. I've still got a lot of those people in my life. Some of them are people like me, they are addicts. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are just, people that like to drink and use for the effects it produced. They've moved on. They still can have a glass of wine. They can still do this. They've changed, their lives have changed according to how their lives changed. I say it opened a lot of doors for me. I met a lot of people. It brought down a lot of my inhibitions, put me into places, and it did. The world opened up. I was always curious about the world, but I needed a bit of help to go and be a part of. And it
wasn't problematic at that time. And if something isn't problematic, you don't think about it all that much.
No, there were problems. I had consequences from the very start,
right.
As in, a lot of the people that I hung about with, I ended up going to a few more funerals than maybe a teenager should do. And my achievements and the predictions for what I would achieve in terms of education, sporting ambition, and financial reward, they all started to suffer. You know, you can more or less look at what where I was heading and what I was looking at educationally and physically in terms of sport. And it just, I was quite happy to sack that off, to be honest with you. I could easily just go, well, I probably wouldn't have been the best anyway.
Yeah. What sports were you playing?
I was an athlete, so I was...
track and field?
Track and field, yeah.
Yeah.
And pretty good. And wasn't too bad at football, and got trials for a couple of teams, but that was based on my speed, not my ability.
Yeah.
But yeah, used to compete nationally up until the age of 18. Afterwards, just let it go. Was supposed to achieve great things, educationally, and my predicted grades were nothing like what my eventual ones were. Yeah. And I did get into university, but instead of coming out with a good degree, I came out with the bare minimum. I didn't turn up. I was more interested in going clubbing, you name it. So there were consequences, but I was still forging a path that I was enjoying. For me, my priorities were not educational achievement. It was go out and have a good time. Damn the consequences, do it later. And I firmly believe that I probably would be able to juggle getting smashed 7 days a week with high achievement.
No pun intended.
Yeah. No, yeah, sorry about that. I didn't notice that.
I love when that happens. I don't. It's never a coincidence. I don't think. So there were some consequences at this point, but you were still very much having a good time. Were you aware of what it did for you and how it affected you? And were you aware a little bit, if I do this, then I feel this way, and if I don't do it, then I feel that way, of what it did for you, what you can't do for yourself, as we always phrase it nowadays? Or was it, or were you not, or was it just, I want to go out, want to get high, want to get laid, want to have a good time?
It was blissful ignorance. I didn't know why I was drinking or taking drugs. I just knew that I enjoyed doing it. So why wouldn't I just do it whenever I could?
Yeah. I remember around...
It was almost, childlike naivety.
Yeah.
In that respect. There was I had no overview on what I was doing.
I say that because I remember that in those days, maybe when I was, say 17, 18 or something like that, we were stoners, full-on stoners every single day. Went out, hash in those days, or some weed, depending on what we could get. And we sat in the car, there was 3 of us, we sat in the car and smoking bongs and whatnot and talking nonsense. And we were always making fun of, that sort of lingo, right? So we'd sort of sarcastically throw things around like, are you using this in order to change the way you feel and stuff? So some of this lingo had entered our consciousness and things, and we sort of felt very clever, being sarcastic and ironic around this. Who would have thought that later on I'd go on and do what I do, but it's a different story. So there was none of that for you, though. So for you, it was just out there, good time, and not think about it. Blissful ignorance, as you say. It
was subconscious. I might have had an idea that things were right, but anyone who's been to 12-step meetings and has come into recovery and has looked back on their life realizes that I changed my surroundings and I changed the people that I hung out with to avoid having any awkward questions about what I was doing.
Absolutely.
The best thing, the best place to hide, if you like, is amongst people who look just like you.
In plain sight, almost, yeah.
Other people have, I can speak to them and they can point out that I was very different to them, even if they were coming out, raving at the weekend. They said, well, you were always a little bit more than we were. You always didn't know when to stop. You couldn't calm down. And they said, we found it a bit hard going. So they would drift off, whether I forced them away or just they didn't like what was going on with me. I became separated from them.
Yeah.
And in the early days, no one wants to drink and use alone.
Yeah.
So you find people that you do, that will do.
You find your tribe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Question 3. What were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? So I'm assuming this might have taken quite a little bit of time, but talk to us essentially about progression and the rock bottom.
Okay.
Or rock bottoms, if you had one.
Yeah, no, I've had, I spent decades just in denial. If I just refused to admit that there was a problem or look at what was going on, then obviously it didn't exist. Very much like an ostrich in that respect. My consequences were, they kind of, I think sometime around about my early 30s, I gave up that idea that one day I would sort this out and would go on to achieve other stuff, that somehow the drink and the drugs were okay for now and at some point they will be replaced by something else. I gave up on that idea and I just gave into this idea that I would drink and use, that was just part and parcel. So I then had to create a narrative around my drinking and using that said, this is the way of great intellectual thinking, this is where my creativity comes from, this is how I maintain my work thing. I get work because I entertain my clients, I get them drunk, I get them high, blah, blah. Funnily enough, my clients just wanted me to do a good job. They weren't booking me to go away on work as an excuse to get drunk and high.
No, they actually needed your
service. They needed my services, and they needed me to deliver what they had to take back to their client.
Yeah.
I never fully got that. I'd change the narrative into, right, we'll go away for 2 weeks and we'll just get it smashed for 2 weeks, and they'll love it so much and they'll feel so rough when they get back to England they won't be able to wait to do it again. So consequences wise on that, I started to get less and less work. I started to still have the same outgoings financially, but with less and less work. So my debt started to increase.
Yeah.
My financial situation, got ever more precarious. Yet it pushed me to drink more and use more because I was worried about my finances. So I spent more on the things that helped me to stay in denial.
On your coping mechanism, quote unquote.
Yep. And my personal relationships, I like being in a relationship, However, my most important relationship was obviously drugs and alcohol, because whenever I was asked to taper off, modify or reduce, I couldn't or wouldn't. I would create a reason why not to. I remember one partner, of many, many years going, well, what's next? And I was like, well, what do you mean, what's next? We're just going to keep drinking and using and be together. I didn't have that ambition left in my relationships. I wanted the companionship and the physical proximity, but I didn't realize that, that was coming second to my need to keep drinking and using. And if I had to forego drugs and alcohol for a partner, then I got rid of the partner.
Right, okay. Did that happen more than once?
Yeah, regularly. And it got progressive. And then my ambitions with my partners changed, and I didn't want to, it's very hard to say this without seeming like I'm egotistical, but the bar that I set for myself in relationships got lower and lower and lower, so they became doomed to failure quicker and quicker and quicker.
So if we translate this a little bit, perhaps, then that means that when perhaps at a certain age you were still thinking about this being potential life partners, and you might go on to the trajectory that people often call, what is it, not nest bump, I think, if I remember this correctly, so that you might have a life partner, you might tie the knot, make a nest together, and perhaps have children and all of that eventually at some point. That wasn't really in the conversation anymore. In the relationships that you were having, you were just having relationships for, spending time with those people, but really your main relationship that you had was with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. So actually the people that I ended up having relationships with were other people who had problems with drug and alcohol. Yeah. We became a mirror to each other in that respect.
Any awareness around that time that, things were slipping, fading?
I was starting to get very depressed around, what my life was looking like. But I didn't want to admit that maybe the drugs and the alcohol were the problem, because I didn't want to give them up.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting around that time? I mean, I often ask the question, how did you lie to yourself, or how did you justify things? Because, of course, when we're still in the really happy, fun phase, and I use these words, with in quotation marks, but still when we're in that phase, then we don't really have that much to justify quite often, or if something happens, then, it was really bad luck. And I mean, I remember crashing my very first car, for instance, which I love dearly. Still not quite over that, yes, even today. And absolutely love that car. And I banged into another car because I was, sky high, and my reactions were so slow and all the rest of it. And I didn't really think at that time. It was obvious that the fact that I was stoned, I mean, just so stoned of, days and days and days of smoking bongs, that wasn't the problem. That someone had parked their car in that particular position was the problem. And what I'm trying to relate really is that when we get a little bit older, where we would start, we just make experiences and things, we would start being able to kind of go, well, actually, if I'm being really honest here, then the problem is actually the drugs and the alcohol. And it's not that I don't seem to be able to find a job or the right partner or any of those things. Eventually, we should be at an age where we'd be able to just actually see, do you know what? The problem here is not what's happening around me. It's what I ingest every day, and I don't want to give up. But our illness seems to blind us in that way.
Absolutely. I didn't want to have. I mean, I'm pretty sharp in most things.
Yep.
I can. I have a degree in astrophysics, not a very good one. I'll go back to my earlier answer on a question about not achieving very highly. But cause and effect, I'm pretty good on that.
Yeah.
However, if I don't want to change something, I am going to just not look at it.
And all your skills and all the things that you learned about causality, extrapolation, and all sorts of other things, abstraction, all of those things don't really seem to come into it.
No, and I didn't want to look, I now know that, I was just terrified of letting go of my comfort blanket, even though my comfort blanket was on fire. For want of a better word, I've wrapped, or soaked in acid. You name it. It's not comforting me anymore.
What did you using look like around that time? And specifically, were you a binge user? Were you a daily user?
Daily. Not always to blackout. Not always to, utter excess. But I had. Somewhere after the age of 30, I'd stopped thinking about moderating. I'd stopped thinking about not being a drinker and a drug taker. I had just decided that that's what I was going to be. So therefore, I was going. I've said this in many shares before. I went into the consequence management business, and I would hope that by changing the deck chairs on the Titanic every day, that somehow the inevitability of the sinking ship wouldn't happen. And some days it didn't. but more progressively, it happened more often. So, I could say to you, yeah, I'm only going to have a couple of drinks today to take the edge off. I'm not going to do cocaine. I'm not going to do weed. And 1 or 2 days, I might manage that. And then all of a sudden, that's fine. I'm all right. But the idea of not even having one was terrifying. Why? How could I knew that once I knew deep down that once I started, I had little or no ability to control or stop. So a lot of my consequence management involved leaving it as late or forcing myself to wait as long as possible before I started.
Yeah, we will come to that in a moment. There's a specific question for that.
Okay, but talk in terms of progression. Yeah, the ones where I said, you know what, I'm only having one tonight, and then it would become a 3-day bender, hundreds of pounds spent. Blackouts, waking up in strange places, unexplained, financial and physical consequences. All of that just seemed to increase, over the course of time until the end, where all the things that I said I wouldn't do, I was starting to do. I did have a period where I blamed all my problems on cocaine. Something happened which I wouldn't want to go into not long after my 40th birthday. I was like, I cannot have that. I'm so appalled at myself that I'm not going to behave like that ever again. It's cocaine's fault. So I knocked the cocaine on the head for 5 years. However, my alcohol use, my MDMA use, my weed use, all of that skyrocketed, and I was still on 3-4 day benders, just not
with cocaine.
Not with cocaine. And then I picked up the cocaine again at 46 for no real reason. I'd turned it down many times over years and years and years, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, why not? And that proceeded to take me into a 5-year downward cycle. I really knew I was lost, but I wasn't prepared to admit it. And my rock bottom wasn't the heart surgery, the heart attacks, the locked hospital wards, or hundreds of thousands of pounds worth in debt and everything else. It was just this realization. I had an out-of-body experience, and I actually got a view of myself, and I felt so sad. I felt like there's this sad old man who doesn't even know how sick he is.
Where did this occur? Where were you when this happened?
This occurred at about 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting at a pub bar on a lock-in, going through a heart attack, having previously been in hospital and had surgery, and my best thinking around this heart attack was to order some more cocaine and deal with it tomorrow. But I had this out-of-body experience. I saw myself, and it stuck. So when I came to the next day, that's the memory I was left with, not the worry of the physical consequences or the financial or whatever. The fact was that I was just a shell, and I had nothing left. I had no more consequence management strategies left. And I didn't know what was truly wrong with me, but I just know that that was my rock bottom. That was, I had nothing.
Yeah, that's when you hit the iceberg.
Yeah, and thankfully there was a person that, I used to drink and use with who had got sober. And when I phoned him and asked him what I needed to Google, he told me I didn't need to Google anything. I just needed to meet him that evening at 7 o'clock. He didn't tell me what we were going to do or what was on the cards. But he'd said to me when I needed help, he would be prepared to give it. And all I could cope with that day was knowing that I had to be at Archway Station at 7 p.m. And when I got there, he took me down the hill. He took me to a meeting, which I was completely convinced he had convened specially for me. because I was that important and I was in that much pain that whatever. But I think maybe I needed to believe that. Then I started to get an idea of what I'd been denying. Didn't come that night, although I did read the doctor's opinion from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous that night, and it was like someone had switched the floodlights on in a previously dark football stadium. I suddenly, all these behaviours that I'd been doing for decades, they were illuminated. I could see what they were, and I felt comforted by that, not appalled. And I hadn't felt comforted by anything for a long time. The drugs and the alcohol weren't comforting me. As I say, this thing that was supposed to be comforting me was on fire. It was burning.
Now, if we just circle back just for a second, because I find it difficult to let that go. Were you in a heart attack when you had this realization?
Yes.
Right. So what, your arm was aching and all of those things that you...
The way my heart attacks present, and I've discovered they're slightly different for everybody. I get the feeling like I've got a block of ice between my shoulder blades, somewhere around the back in the middle. I lose sensation in my arms. The blood flow drops down. I'm not, whatever. And I get incredible, I just explode in a cold sweat. I mean, like, imagine you've just run 10k on the hottest day of the year and it's literally pouring down your body.
And you were were you on a use up when this was happening?
Yeah, I was off the back of this was actually off the back. I'd previously been in hospital 30 days before, and I'd come out of hospital and gone out.
This is so dangerous.
On a 30-day binge, not a 3-dayer.
Yeah, because that's where our illness.
I didn't want to face up to it. I was running away, and I'm really grateful for that bit of vanity, if you like. My vanity got me in, because cause and effect wasn't going to do it.
No,
I had to. That's my Achilles heel, is my vanity, but it also proved to be how God got to me.
It's funny how those character defects, I mean, I only needed one massive humiliation. It felt like that, with right on this spot where we were recording, where I collapsed and overdosed, and, the ambulance came and preparing me for CPR, all the rest of it. And then, being in hospital and going through all of that, I felt, because I'm full of pride, my character defect, I felt so low and so humiliated by this, and I'd wanted to stop anyway, and then this happened. That was enough. I didn't have to do it 10 times. Just the one time was enough for me to really give up and surrender. I say the one time. There were other instances beforehand, but one that was so incredibly clear like that, so... But it does highlight, of course, the dangers of what it is that we do to our bodies, and that should not really be underestimated at all, because we all think as ever that, it's never going to happen to me, but it does. It does happen to you, Question 4 is, and it's interesting because you were in a place where your life was in danger. Question 4 is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide at your worst? If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Yes. Yeah. I had... Yeah. Yeah, the simple answer is yes.
Yeah.
It crossed my mind on numerous occasions.
And it can come in different ways, right? Either through an act of attempt or by neglect, which is what was happening to you.
Mine was through neglect. It was like I didn't care anymore. I'd lost mentally, the fight had gone to stay alive, and I really didn't care. I still had concerns around what kind of funeral I would have and how people might think of me. And I would start to idealize how upset people would be. And, I planned my funeral. I wanted to give everyone a really good time. But did I care? No. I didn't. Deep down inside, I was really very unimpressed with where I was at in my life. It wasn't something. All the great dreams that I had, and all the high ideals I had for myself, and how I wasn't I was far from achieving any of them, and I felt, it didn't matter anymore.
There's usually two ways I've noticed two ways that we react to this, right? It's either we blame life, so life's treated me badly, outside circumstances have treated me badly, and that sort of thing. I belong to that category. Or the other category is I'm no good, I fuck everything up, this, that, and the other. Which of the two will you win?
Both.
All right. Okay. Good.
Outwardly, I raged at the world. And if I spoke to anyone, I had lots of excuses why this wasn't happening, why that wasn't happening, why this had happened, etc., etc. I could find fault with everybody and anybody. And I could use those things to justify stuff in a debate with people, whether they believed me or not. That's how I was going to present to the world. But internally, over time, those excuses didn't satisfy me. And they were getting less and less. They were less able to satisfy me. That was just eventually a front that I gave to everybody else. If someone said, "How are you?" I'd always lie. I would always have lots of plans and things to try and, even though I knew I looked terrible, I knew I didn't have anything to offer, I would still have some kind of bullshit that might just about, whether they believed it or not, just about got me through that conversation. But it was when I was on my own, or even sometimes when I was spouting this stuff, I was thinking, that's crap. That's utter rubbish. And I couldn't stand the lie, but the only way I could get rid of the feeling I had around the lie was to do what I know, the only thing I knew, which was to drink it and drug it away. And eventually I couldn't do it any longer. The drugs and the alcohol didn't take that lack of self-esteem and that lack of, that denial of my own awareness. They weren't enough to block it out anymore. And then I found myself in this position of being drunk and high and miserable.
And it's a terrible place to be in.
And that's what took me down really quickly.
I think if you're at the point where, as the saying goes, the drugs don't work.
And I got more extreme in my attempts to prove to everyone that they could work. But I wasn't trying to prove it to anyone else, really. I was hoping against hope that I could prove it to myself.
That sounds very much like the end is near when you get to that stage. I know this from my own experience, absolutely. And I experienced it twice, once in my 20s and then again in my 40s, because I clearly one time wasn't enough for me to learn. So, question 5. We sort of alluded to it a little bit. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
People, places and things, basically. I would try to manage how I drank, how I used, what substances I used, in what order.
So start with the coke first and then add the alcohol, or start with the alcohol and then you add the coke. I've been around that bend.
Only drink beer, stay clear of whiskey. You end up in some bad states, so go to rum instead. Buy expensive stuff, not the cheap stuff. Try never to be alone when you do it. Stay with this girl, this poor unfortunate person that you're putting through hell, because that's going to turn it around. Win the lottery. That was another one. Didn't buy a ticket, but I was always going to sort it out after something else. I was going to have something external that was going to magically help me to get a grip on it. I never ever once considered abstinence, stopping or seeking help.
Or indeed that even if you wanted to, that you might not be able to.
that didn't bear thinking about.
No.
Because I'm the great me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back to question one, self-reliance. I had decided that the only way I was going to survive in life was to never ask for help, to never be vulnerable. It turned out that what I really needed to do was to do what most sensible people do. As if you don't know how to do something and you're struggling, see if there's someone out there who knows how to do it better than you.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. It is. It rings so true to me. I've said this many times on here. Is that I was very much convinced I could fix this by myself. I clung, even if I spoke English, it'd be so much easier. I clung to things that I remember giving up smoking, cigarettes, and it wasn't great, but it wasn't that difficult, right? In hindsight, I know it's just because I wasn't really, in my heart of hearts, I wasn't really a smoker, right? Even though I smoked for many a year. Do you want to hear something funny?
I gave up cigarettes in the hope that by giving them up, I could carry on with the coke.
Well, yeah, it's addict's logic, right? And but because I had been able to do that, I felt, oh, fine, obviously, look, I was able to give up fags, so, clearly I can give this up anytime I want. I really, truly believe that. And it wasn't until I finally, as you were saying, asked someone else, look, I can't do this by myself. It wasn't until then that help finally came and that I was open to it. So, yeah, it's a shared experience.
And it actually it served me well in life now that I don't ask for help often enough, but I am able now to gauge when I don't know something. I'm able to admit that I don't know stuff now. So my benefit of hitting my rock bottom and eventually going, I do have a problem with drugs and alcohol, I don't know how to be sober, has actually had a knock-on beneficial effect in sobriety.
Yeah.
Because although I'm not going around asking people to help me do everything, I do now have an ability to go, you know what, if I don't know, maybe I'm not scared to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knew?
Yeah.
Question 6. Once you got into the rooms and you'd gone to Archway and they had arranged a meeting, just for you, which is very kind of them. So once you got to the rooms, did you struggle with the word God?
I don't think I heard it on the first meeting.
Maybe they didn't say it just for you.
Maybe they didn't. Maybe I just, I seriously believed that in that first meeting, everyone had been convened for me because everything they said seemed to cut through to me. It had a really deep, profound effect. I thought my friend Will, who took me to that meeting, had literally told the guy who was doing the share what to say specifically to make sure that I understood what my problem was and that I needed to be there. I love the
concept of this, that they would arrange this meeting for you and everything is whispered into this guy's ear and, they're all getting a whole lot sort of like cards and things that will remind them of it, like cheat sheets.
That they'd done nothing else all that afternoon apart from, manufacture this meeting dedicated for me
to your specification. Really.
But funnily enough, in hindsight, I can see now that meeting was manufactured specifically for me because they're there to treat addiction. And even if I didn't know I was an addict, once I'm there, then I am going to identify, I am going to realize because that's by very nature of it, it's just how it had to be, and it had to be personal to me.
Absolutely. And then later on, the question was, when you got to the rooms, did you struggle with the word God? So at some point you started interacting with the 12 steps. You perhaps realized at some point that all meetings were like this and that they weren't just made for Carl F, but, for addicts as a whole, and so on. And when you started interacting with the steps and you came to step 2 and then 3, did you struggle with the word God? And did you struggle with the concept of finding a higher power?
Yes and no. in that respect. Part of my way I'd been living and the way I'd conditioned myself from an early age was to be fiercely self-reliant. Therefore, anybody who had a God was weak, poor souls, and I was very, very down on people that, I was very condescending towards people that had a faith. Yet I believed in myself. I believed in science. I believed that 1 + 1 = 2. Why have we got a decimal system, not a, what's binary, what's anything else, And I knew from studying the philosophy of science that, you make an assumption, you take a leap of faith at some point, and you choose to believe that this is your incontrovertible truth upon which you will build a model for your understanding.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with believing in things, but I'd conditioned myself to say that religion and God was, rubbish. It was for weak people that didn't have enough intelligence to deal with stuff. I was desperate, though, and I was told, that I was going to need to pray, I was going to need to meditate, and I was going to need to get connected to a power greater than myself. I had a lot of resistance to God, but my sponsor kept saying, are you the most powerful thing in the world? And obviously I'm not.
Yeah.
If I'm not, and I'm particularly powerless over alcohol and cocaine, what do I need? I need a power. That logic I cannot fault, much as it made me angry. I cannot fault the thinking process behind that. So once I'd swallowed that, okay, what do I? And he said, well, you can pray to anything. You can, but so for me, the God word had just to be softened. And I did that through action and practice. And I was just asked to admit in the mornings that I was powerless, and that I needed help. So I would just start my mornings with, look, if there's anything out there that can help me, I'd really appreciate it. And then if I got a clean and sober day, I got used to saying thank you at night. And I got 7 days, and then 30 days, and then 60 days. And I still couldn't say the word God. It stirred up so much resistance in me. I bristled, I think, is extremely,
a wonderful word.
Extreme bristle.
Yeah,
because I had pride around it. I had arrogance, I had ego around all of this stuff because, I'd created, and I'd said so many times to people, I'd argued for the power of me and logic and thought over and above this idea of faith, even though I was being a bit of a hypocrite because I was quite prepared to believe in other stuff. And I like this idea of good orderly direction, that the power of good.
Yeah.
And then eventually, after about a year or so, I was able to take the power of good and chop an O out of it, and it became God. It just became a word that described this thing that I had no idea what it was, but was so obviously part and parcel of my everyday existence, and that was helping me so much that I didn't actually care anymore.
Yeah. What word you attached to it?
What word I attached to it.
So
it was just, softening, really.
Softening.
But I wasn't, and no one forced me. They just kept saying, what's your idea? What could you pray to? And I thought that was a nice way of looking at it. What could you ask for? What could you reach out to for help?
If it wasn't,
and there's so much out there that you can look at and go, so much I don't understand and I can't see how it's all working, but it is working.
Yeah, I've said this many times, and I think that this isn't exactly a mystery to anyone, but if it wasn't a bring your own God situation, I don't think I'd be sober today, right? If it had to be a particular vision of someone, someone's particular something like that. If it wasn't like that, then I would have really struggled. So it's such a key part of the program, Now I also found my way in over good, the power of good. And then at some point just chopped out no. But I don't always use the word God, and I have no problems with people who don't like the word or do like the word. I think it was Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual writer, who said that words are just signposts really to something else, aren't they? They just denote things, don't they? So they're not the actual thing.
On their own, they have no value.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Our question 7, hot on the heels of that. How do you experience your higher power today, your God today?
When I feel all right. Simple. If I'm comfortable, I'm not resentful, fearful, stressed, or in some other way disturbed, greedy, lustful, lazy. If I'm just getting on with stuff and feeling okay, that's God for me. That's how I experience it, just as a living experience. Because I never had peace of mind, and I never had serenity, ever, truly. I had the illusion of it. I had fleeting moments of feeling in control and being in charge. I had excitement, I had adrenaline, whatever. But those were all, that wasn't just a core belief that I was all right and that the world was all right and this is the right thing to do. And so, very simply, God is a sensation for me, and I know I'm connected and I know God's there with me when I'm just feeling okay and I'm not trying to run the show too much. I'm still doing stuff. I'm still very busy. And I liked that when I was asked to connect to a power greater than myself, that I was not, giving up my will or my sense of self or my skill set or anything that, whatever. I'm just going to get it in alignment with what is God's way, if you like, or the power of good's way. So when I'm in alignment, I'm not fighting or trying to control or whatever, and ergo I feel it's all right because I'm not in conflict. I'm not I'm not either trying to push too much or pull too much. I'm just in sync.
My sponsor likes the word flow for that particular reason. When you just go with the flow, you're not struggling. As it says in the book, we do not struggle. What does that mean? Well, it means that we don't go against what is. And flow is a really great word, actually, I think, for this. It really is quite, it resonates with me. Our question 9, which character defects give you most trouble today?
Laziness. Closely followed by shame, guilt, that I haven't done as much as I think I should have done. Fear crops up. And it's almost too quick to react to at times. And it triggers off all my other character defects, obviously. And I can get trapped in a resentment very quickly.
Catch them like a virus sometimes.
Although, that awareness which I've developed gives me an opportunity. I know the futility of them only too well, and I like to get rid of them as quick as possible. If I could get rid of one of my character defects that I find really unappealing about myself, and that's judgment. I am so judgmental, and it's a really ugly characteristic. I don't like it in other people. And I really don't like it in myself. And I wish it didn't crop up as often as it does. But again, awareness is the first stage in that. How do I educate myself out of it? Well, some of it's education, some of it's reminding myself that I don't like this characteristic, therefore, practice not practicing it, and other times just notice when it crops up and try and do better.
Yeah. Thank you. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Freedom. Not freedom to be perfect, but just freedom. To have a mind now that could go in any direction, to have a body that can go, that doesn't continually get hijacked by the need to have another one to the expense of everything else. I was asked, to put down my fears as part of my step 4. And the first one on that list was fear of losing my freedom. I've always had this idea that I want to always have choice. I don't want to be told what to do. Maybe that goes back to me constructing this idea of being self-reliant and independent of the world. But I've always wanted to have freedom. I've always wanted to have everything available and open to me. And I'd never really had that. So that's, I've been set free. What I do with that freedom, some days I do well, other days not so well.
But
who knows?
Freedom.
But it's freedom.
That is exactly what freedom's all about.
And it's this freedom from the narrative in my head. I know it's there now. That's set me free. To know that I didn't even know that you had a narrator in your head until I stopped putting drink and drugs in me, and I suddenly realised how noisy and how many different voices there are up there. And that I had no freedom from that for decades. It just I had no answers, and I can now attach to my thinking or not attach to it, make better choices.
Freedom. It's all about having choices.
And all I have to do is remember that I need to live according to a set of spiritual principles as divined by what can only be a God. Because the human condition has fear, jealousy, shame, guilt, remorse, judgment, contempt, all of those things which aren't hope, faith, courage, willingness, love, forgiveness, humility, etc. So I gain my freedom through just practicing 12 spiritual principles.
Thank you. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Just ask them, just be honest about your own experience. I would probably steer them towards what happens when you put a substance in you, what happens physically and mentally at that point, because we all have that experience if we're capable of being honest. Then I would suggest they look at the second bit and go, what happens when you're sober? Have you tried, and just see what they say. We've got 25 questions on the self-test for Cocaine Anonymous. I think I answered yes to 24, and 25 was, well, maybe. I don't need, for me, the doctor's opinion was enough. I knew what happened to me when I put a substance in me. I had decades of experience around that. The fact that once I put a substance in me, if it's alcohol, I get thirstier. If I put coke in me, I would just want more. I don't think, there's a complete change in the way my thinking has no bearing on it. I just reconstruct my thinking to make sure I get the next one. So my experience around that was enough for me to go, well, I've got a physical problem. And then, I gradually came to understand what my mental issue, what was going on for me with my mental condition and my spiritual condition afterwards.
Yeah.
So just look at it physically to start with. Can you safely have just one, or at certain times do you seem to be powered by something else? If you cannot, once you've started, moderate, slow down, or control to whatever extent that presents within you, are you safe to put the first one in? Because you really don't know what's going to happen next. You're playing Russian roulette with your life and everything else. So I can't. I couldn't tell you. I could firmly believe, as I did on my, the night where I'm having a heart attack and my best thinking is to go and buy a load of cocaine, that at 5:30 the previous night, having done 30 odd days going out every night with various degrees, well, actually, it was pretty hideous, that 30 days. There wasn't one night that wasn't to blackout. There wasn't one night that wasn't extreme. But at 5:30 on the night of my last use up, I was convinced I was only having one drink to take the edge off the previous 30 days.
Yeah.
And there I am, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Back.
In
that place.
Yeah. I don't need to switch a light switch on and off more than about 2 or 3 times before I suddenly go, I think I know what's going to happen when I can see another light switch in another building and go, that probably is going to switch a light on.
Yeah. Like it did in the other one. So clearly, so there must be principle here.
So this 1 pint of Guinness that's just going to take the edge. It doesn't matter what pub it's in, what planet it's on, or wherever else, there's a good chance it's going to do the same thing again and again.
Yeah.
So, and then, if they feel that they might have that condition, just invite them to stick around. Ask them if they want to do something about it. Because you can acknowledge you've got a problem and still refuse to do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, the conversation with the sponsee about this quite recently, about admitting that we have, that we're powerless, admitting our powerlessness, or accepting that we're powerless. Because if you'd asked me maybe a year or so before I came into the rooms, I'd have said to you, yes, I am powerless over cocaine. But I didn't really fully accept it, because the moment you accept something, you are also responsible for the outcome. You take on that responsibility of saying, okay, I have this, so it also means that it is up to me to do something about it. So I quite readily admit that I was a cocaine addict, that I had a cocaine problem, and that alcohol played a large part within that, and so on. And I could probably banged on about it for an hour or so if you'd have asked me. But I wasn't willing to accept it. I wasn't willing to take responsibility for it.
I was identical to yourself. The fact that I understood what was going on with me, I thought would be sufficient for me to solve the problem. As you say, I'd admitted it.
Yeah.
I'd said, 1 + 1 = 2. Red, green and blue combined together gives you white. All of that sort of stuff. I could see that it was there, but it took me my first 3 months of recovery to turn it from an admission to an acceptance. And the fellowship held me, my sponsor held me, commitments at meetings kept me going whilst that change was beginning to happen. It says we're unwilling to admit. Well, I was anxious to admit in the hope that would somehow solve the problem. But when I fully conceded, then it's like, okay, you have to do something. You can't concede and not do. And your choices are quite simple at that point.
Yeah.
You either try and do recovery, or you continue in the sure knowledge that it's going to get you.
Yeah, indeed so.
not easy choices to make if you are an alcoholic or an addict. No. And the big book understood that, that not everybody who knows they have a problem is necessarily going to do something about it.
That's true.
And that's one of the very frustrating things about being in a fellowship, is seeing so many people for whom you know there's a solution, but that you can't give it to them. You can't do it.
No, you can't.
It's down to them, and it's necessary that if you're going to let go or put your will in alignment with the power greater than yourself, you absolutely have to accept that you are genuinely powerless. Because if you can't hold on to any idea that you've got some power, you're blocked off from the power you need.
No, absolutely.
So it can be uncomfortable, it can be difficult, and it can take lots of little moments to get you there. There's the hallelujah ones, and then there's the incremental ones. And I think I had lots of incremental ones, followed by one that all led up to a moment where I was able to just go, you know what, I accept this. And the easiest way for me to accept it at first was just to accept it for the next hour, the next half a day or day. Just go, does it matter whether I truly believe that I am or not? Shall I just behave as if I am for this period of time? And then I could get away from having the debate about whether one day I would be able to drink and use successfully again, whether I'd made too much of it, whether there was whatever. And I could just behave accordingly. I've had this discussion with the sponsor recently, and I'm just going to say, yeah, my name is X, I'm an alcoholic, therefore I can't drink. That's enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
For now.
And our last question, our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
Wasn't so bad after all, was it?
I love that. That's a great answer. That's a great answer. Thank you. Carl, you've been really great today. I love the way you're so eloquent with the way you frame things, and you've been very honest and courageous in your share. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Before we close off, you've got an event, we've got an event coming up, and there's a public information drive there as well and so on. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about it?
Yeah. The Cocaine Anonymous is having its European Regional Convention, which, for anyone who doesn't know about these things, is where for 3 days, from the 28th of March to the 30th of March, we take over a hotel, which is have a big conference room and loads of little other rooms. And it will be focused for addicts from all over Europe, regardless of the substance that they use, to come together in fellowship and unity and in service. There will be international shares, there will be meditations, breakout rooms, the opportunity to come together with your fellows, but also alongside of it, we're having what's called the European PI Regional Convention, which is where those of us who do service in PI, and PI, for those who don't know, stands for public information. It's basically letting anybody who's been affected by drug addiction or alcoholism know who we are, what we do, where to find us. Because when I say anybody who's affected by drug addiction, yes, we reach out to addicts. We try to go into, rehabs and hostels and look out for people who are actually actively drinking and using. But we also want to let, for every alcoholic and addict, there is a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a cousin, an aunt, an employer, an emergency services worker, a neighbour, the shopkeepers, their local environments, you name it, the list is endless. Anybody is being touched by this. So we like to reach out to anybody and everybody, and we reach out not only, and we're looking at ways in which we can better do this, and we can better, let people know, first and foremost, what is addiction, because there's so much, misconception around what that is.
Stigma, misinformation, all of it. Yeah.
So how can we better educate? And we found that within London, our greatest resource within CA is our own personal members and their stories of recovery. So as well as getting out into our neighbourhoods and putting up posters and putting stuff on community boards, we like to try and present to anybody and everybody who may be able to refer people with confidence to our meetings. We'll be developing strategies to meet up with the police, with the probation services, with the medical professionals, with employers. And it's a remarkably satisfying piece of service. I was lucky that it was another addict who identified my problem, and as I say, I didn't know what to Google. If I didn't have him in my life, who would have got me to my first meeting? I don't know. But the more people that know about CA or AA or NA or DAA or CAA or whatever, if they know about addiction, they will also automatically know that addicts can recover. And that a lot of them seem to recover through the anonymous fellowships, which are, the most successful way that addicts recover. It's proven that mutual aid groups or lived experience recovery organisations, once people go and accept for themselves the problem, they have a better chance of getting clean and staying clean. And I'd just like more people to know about it, not because of any sense of it, just because it worked for me. And my life has improved exponentially. I've had 2 lives, neither of which I regret. I'm very grateful that my first life led me to my second.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be in March 28th, 29th and 30th at the Doubletree Hilton in London, which is in southeast London. I will put a link into the show notes for people to be able to find it.
Splendid. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl, again for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you, Silvio.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And this next bit? It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.